Hello, and welcome to Ed Talks with Khan Academy. I am excited today to talk with Kara Bobroff, who is the founder of the Native American Community Academy and Naca Inspired Schools. We're going to talk about culture in education broadly and the education of Native American students in particular. So looking forward to that. Before we get started, a couple of notes to reminder that Khan Academy is a nonprofit organization, and we are able to do our work thanks to the generous donations from people like you. If you go to khanacademy.org/donate, you will see and have the opportunity to be able to donate to help us continue our mission. Similarly, we want to thank some of our supporters who really stepped up during the COVID crisis to help us with our work, and that includes Bank of America, AT&T, Google.org, Novartis, Fastly, and General Motors. Reminder, if you want to hear this talk again, or if you have missed some and want to catch up, you can get audio versions of these talks at the Homeroom with Sal podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. So with that, let me welcome Kara Bobroff. It's nice to have you.
It's nice to be here. I'm super excited for our conversation and I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. So I'd like to start off asking people, how did you get to where you are today? Tell us a little bit about your path to starting these schools and this network and all the work you do.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen, for that. It's an interesting story of like two or three different dynamics of a journey, both personal, professional, and then also like kind of a calling of what needed to happen within our community. So I'm Navajo and Lakota. Going to introduce myself in that way. Yakte, Kara Bobroff, Unishe, Ashinashli, Natani Bashishchin. So on my mother's side, biological mother's side, I am Navajo, and our family's from a community in New Mexico called Rama, which is not contiguous with Navajo Nation, but part of Navajo Nation. And on that side, we're the Salt Clan, and that's how we identify. So we recognize our relatives. So if any relatives out there today that are also the Salt Clan and Navajo, I just wanted to say, open up kind of a conversation on that level, just to say that's an important relationship. The second part is Lakota, and on that side, my biological father is from Pine Ridge area, and so near Pine Ridge and Rosebud. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and basically my parents were both educators. My mom was a middle school teacher her entire life. My father was a teacher, assistant principal, became a systems leader as well of our school district, but not really knowing I was going to become a teacher. So really had a important aspect of something that happened when I was about 19 years old. I served as a mental health worker in a residential treatment center, and that was the first time I started to work with youth who were 6 years, 7 years, 8 years younger than I, who are going in and out of various systems, from foster care to the psychiatric hospital to home, for all sorts of reasons. And I think that really set in stone for me that those students had been, or the children had been through more in their life than I would ever have to really endure, and kind of like really drew me into education, although my family's influence had for sure. Became a special education teacher at the school I went to, started to see all the good things about being a teacher, and also started to see some inequities around who had access to what kind of courses and how that was predetermined for a lot of kids, and reflected back on my own experience and saw that that was probably true when I was there. Just like there was a group of us, and a third of us went to one classroom, a third of us went to another, and a third of us went to another, and not really sure why, but then we would kind of like reconnect. So that was interesting to experience. Served as assistant principal at the school my older siblings went to, which freaked them out. So you can imagine, like, how can you be the assistant principal where we went to school? My journey took me to the Bay Area, and I served as a dean of students in Marin County at a school called Miller Creek Middle School. And that was the first time I started to see a couple things. One, that school provided so many opportunities for their students and families, and was really responsive to their community. It wasn't a question of which college kids would go to. It was a question of like what college, I mean, if they would go to college, it was a question of like which college they would go to, which was very different, much more responsive socially and emotionally to students. However, there was a lack of diversity. So also from an equity standpoint, just kind of saw like the difference between what students and teachers had there as a public school and then what I kind of experienced myself, and how schools were operated at that time. Also during that time back home, I was there for 4 years, there was a conversation around Native American education and a need for a Native American mandated charter school. And that's probably the first time I heard about that, and I always thought that'd be a cool place to work when I moved back home. However, you know, I think that that was kind of grounded in the fact that many of our elders and those who'd come before in an urban setting had always had a longing to do something more for Native youth in Albuquerque specifically, knowing that that district serves about 80,000 kids, 6,000 to 7,000 self-identify as Native, and in like that time to now, when we look at the census, that population of urban Indigenous families has increased, not only in Albuquerque but across the United States. So just kind of got an interest in that. Would go back and forth from different, you know, times, just having that conversation, and nothing really kind of came to. My journey took me to Shiprock, New Mexico, where I was served as a principal at Naca Middle School, which was like the best school on earth in the sense of like a place I really felt connected. I kind of thought like I didn't speak my language fluently, so I didn't know if I would be the best principal for the community. But what I found was a couple things. One, that the strengths of the students and families and the cultural knowledge was so great that it should be incorporated into the school, as like how the students in Marin had so many things brought into their school, and you know, opportunities as well. But there was a dialogue that was going on that was really troublesome, in the sense that at that time the school board thought, well, we shouldn't be teaching Navajo language because that inhibits students' ability to read. And if you think about research in general, or just like things that we know to be true when you're bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, those are all major strengths. There's a lot of bias to unpack, a lot of institutionalized, I would say, deficit mindsets around the students. Like, are these students going to go to college? And even like teachers that I was becoming, you know, the principal of would say to me, the families here don't necessarily value education, and so why would we ask our students whether they want to go to college? And so I try to like remain calm and diplomatic, at the same time use data to prove that that wasn't true, which we did by, you know, kind of, you know, engaging our parents in that conversation, and found that like, you know, 98% of families want their kids to go on to a 2 to 4 year college experience. So just that was a really tough situation, because there was a lot of opportunity. The school was like fledgling and almost went into like a school improvement process that would have put them in danger of like being taken over by the state at that time. We were able to turn it around and really started to think about differentiation, more involvement of student voice, all those good things that people would want their kids to have in a school. And we saw progress. So as well as like my own personal journey around my own identity, growing up not on the reservation but in a setting, being, you know, disconnected from my family and then having to reconnect was really a powerful thing that I was experiencing. But came back home, wanted to follow up on the idea of Naca, and really started to engage the community in that process. So I would say it's a lot of those different things. And then also just, you know, I would say my family had a lot of like impact on me, both like immediately, and also some of my grandparents who really like forged the way around education within their own communities too.
Wow, that is excellent. So that kind of leads us right into, tell us a little bit about the Native American Community Academy, and if we went and visited, what would we see? What would it look like?
So Naca is like synonymous with me with the same like word as far as love. Like there is so much like interconnectedness and like relationships among students, teachers, and families. It's truly a community. I think of Naca like in the essence of being like something that was not in existence that came into existence. It just connected people together in ways that grew an entire like web of support for generations. So it's our 16th year. You would see students learning inside and outside, so like land-based learning as well as learning like in a traditional, I guess, classroom. You would see students on a college campus, and you would also see early learning taking place in an elementary school. Access to 4 or 5 different languages that they can take throughout the time that they're at the school: Lakota, Zuni, Navajo language, Keres, Tiwa, Tewa. Partnerships with community organizations, school access to school-based health centers. Students being able to not only know like who they are and where they come from, but being able to articulate a vision they have that's meaningful to them based on their own worldview. one of the foundational pieces of Naca as we were putting the school together, and like what I mean by that is we literally went out and talked to community members over a period of like a year and a half, 2 years about, what is it that we want to see for Native American students? And three things rang true. One is that there would be both access and like success of going to college. And that was based on a lot of people's experience about not having that within their own education and or going to college and not succeeding within the first year, and for all sorts of different reasons. The second is that the students would be secure in their identity and understanding like what is their identity, not only as an Indigenous person, but maybe somebody who's bicultural, somebody who also has like a passion in the area of the arts, but being able to be in connection with that in a very real way is one major outcome. And the last is that students would be healthy. And this is where the Naca Wellness Wheel, it's on our website, anybody can access it, is foundational to the start of the school. We talked a lot about like what patterns and like aspects of Native American education had not worked in the past. And we talked about like some of the things that we saw as far as data and outcomes for Native students, but we wanted to start with a strengths-based mindset. And we selected the Wellness Wheel, which is kind of based off of basically a lot of different tribes. Think of like people as being like whole individuals. Like you're not just coming to school to access like one aspect of who you are. You bring all of yourself. So intellectually, how are our students, faring? Physically, like your physical wellness, as well as your social emotional wellness and your connection to your community and overall spirituality. And spirituality not being religiosity, but realizing like, what are those things that renew us? What are those things that we can help reflect upon? So our students spend a lot of time working with the Wellness Wheel, as well as other courses and classes. 95% of the students' day is grounded in Indigenous perspectives, meaning that we're bringing in either whether that's authors or whether that's like knowledge from elders or knowledge from our content teachers in the languages, or Indigenous science and understanding, ecological aspects of different things that have taken place. But those things are integrated into how students are, how and what students are learning, and how being really, really important, I think, too. So those are all the things that you would see. I can talk about Naca for several hours, but I always feel like when I think of like our students are learning things that may be, hard to learn. So I think of like kids in the middle school who are understanding like the role of education in Native communities around boarding schools, right? And so they experience a lot of emotion around that. They're doing an intergenerational interview with their grandmother who went to boarding school, who's reflecting back to them. I'm glad you're at Naca. You have access to language and culture. I didn't. All of those like really powerful things. They take that interview and transcribe it into an actual, written piece. Use that piece in the like student demonstration where they're like presenting that back to their community. And then proactively as an entire class, they decide to do something that's much more positive and productive, as to like not get caught into the negativity or the victimization of like our history, but really be more, I guess like a visionary in the sense of like they have like the ability to really, empower themselves to think about what it is they want to see different. So a lot of different aspects of that. And we really hope that Naca is a place where our students can not only explore their identity, but act upon it in ways that make sense, like whether that's slam poetry, it could be, a service-oriented project, could be, anything that really resonates with them. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about Naca, but it's a pretty amazing place.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. It definitely, I have so many questions, and I know we want to talk about the network piece too. But one of the things that I know I see in learning research is that when students feel like they belong and have that feeling of belongingness, we see better learning outcomes as well. And it sounds like that building in that culture, it seems related to that research of where things are. So do you see that relationship between, for instance, the identity and academic achievement as well?
Yeah, I would say the belonging and connectedness of the essence of the community of our school is huge. I think of like a story of one of our students. Her mom shared this with me, but she came to Naca, and for the first semester, at least 6 months, was really, quiet, didn't really, share too much, but was always participating and like did what she needed to do, and like, you know, was a really cool kid, and just like, but didn't really like articulate a lot and shares too much with her peers or in the classroom setting. And then she kind of turned a corner, and I remember her mom came back and said, you know, like, like my daughter, the entire time she was in school up until the time she came, didn't talk in school, and now I can't get her to stop talking. Like total transformation in the sense of like now she's like leading classroom discussions, like she's leading projects, she's like involved in like different kind of extracurricular activities. And so I feel like that I know from my own personal experience, when you're in a setting that sees who you are, is reflected in what you're learning, values who you are and what that is, that you open up and you're able to not have to navigate like the worry about like how is people perceiving me, or are they going to make fun of the fact that I have to go to a ceremony for, you know, a few days with my family and come back, or that there's a song that's a traditional song that we want to share. So all of those things are some points of strength, and like and it becomes like just that's how the school is, right? It's not, this is how our community, you know, has been operating since, you know, time immemorial, let alone the fact that, you know, kids can be leading in that space. So that's like one small story. You know, I do remember the worst kind of situation of that is like when you're in a school setting where that's not valued, and it's actually like you experience some sort of microaggression and or like racial you know, slur of some sort, and then that like shuts kids down really quickly. So we do see that. I would say that we also see like some of the students who are involved in like learning their language. It gives them a bigger insight into their history as well as their identity, and that helps set them up for later success. Some of our alumni who went to different schools, like ranging from Ivies to small liberal arts schools, community colleges, tribal colleges, all kind of report back like, well, like these are the teachers who had the biggest impact on us, which were largely the teachers who held most of that cultural knowledge and connectedness.
Yeah.
And also they, you know, they're like, Ms. Bobroff, like when we went to this, you know, I went to so-and-so school, I started this like effort around Native American, you know, students, but also all of the other students of color were going through an identity crisis, and they were having a really hard time and struggling in a different setting. And I didn't really go through that. Like I felt super grounded in who I was. A lot of the content we had already like, you know, engaged with. And so I felt better prepared in that sense. So I think that definitely the belonging is a huge piece, and also understanding your own identity. And also we're talking about generations of folks who've been separated. When you think about what boarding schools did to our communities, and just not having that be the perspective of education that most students across the country engage with.
Can you give a little bit of that history for folks that aren't familiar of the boarding schools and what that, the results of that were?
So there's like a quote that talks about basically like killing the Indian and saving the man. So this idea that both assimilation and kind of direct colonization of children being removed from their homes would be more beneficial to Native American communities across the United States. And this was like back in the 1800s, and thinking about, and also iterations of that all the way through the time that we are now in today. So I think of it in a couple ways. One, pre-contact, there wasn't any kind of interaction between Native communities and Westernized culture, and there wasn't even an institution of education. We call that like Indigenous education. Then we did have like the treaties that were negotiated across our across the country. I think of my tribe, the Navajo Nation in particular. And one thing that holds true in that sense is that the way I was told was that our leaders at that time were forcibly removed, and all of our people from one side of our state to the other, and imprisoned in an encampment. In that encampment, in order to go back after 2.5 years, they had to negotiate a treaty. Part of that treaty negotiation was that the Navajo Nation would take on one teacher for 25 kids that would be provided by the United States government. And the leaders were having this discussion in Navajo with a Spanish interpreter to Spanish, and Spanish to English, and English back to Spanish. And so it was quite, something that was of great concern. Otherwise, we would have been removed to Oklahoma or potentially Florida. So in order to go back to our four sacred mountains, they said yes. But they asked, like, what are the patterns of this education system? how does it work? How does it function? Before that, like learning was seamless within communities and also within like the origins of our seasons. So that's one example. As we move through, like as you get into the 50s and 60s and 70s, a resurgence of tribal colleges as well as other schools focused on language and culture through self-determination. And so you started to see schools like now Rough Rock demonstration schools and the Raymond Day School that were started to bring language and culture and community-based education back into communities versus having students have to leave their community. And now we're in a time where I feel like there's such a movement around Indigenous people and also recognizing the importance of culturally linguistically responsive education as well as like what's being taught. That's really, really important. And it's important to kids first and foremost. And I think that's what makes their education better and also helps them be more successful in being able to do what they need to do and knowing who they are and understanding that history. And also all students, I think, need to understand that for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so that leads to then the question that all students need to understand this. How do we take the things that you've learned through Naca and think about scale and where those are? So I know one step was the Naca inspired school. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like within the first 2 years of Naca, we were asked several times, like, can we start a Naca in our community? So when people come to visit, they're like, oh my God, this is possible. This is what people were writing about in the 50s and 60s. This is what, our, elders were saying needs to be incorporated back into school, right? So we were like, yes, but it needs to come from your community. So we're like, how do we do that? So we put together the Naca Inspired Schools Network. I worked with some folks to think about like what that would look like. Basically, we support fellows who work with their communities and engage them in a similar process as we did at Naca to come up with their own mission and vision of a school that makes sense for them around Indigenous education. So there's, let's see, maybe 5, 6 schools in New Mexico right now, some up in South Dakota that are coming online, Denver, as well as another one down in Ute. And so really it's just like having a conversation about if we were to build something for our children and Native American kids, like wherever that may be, what would that look like? What would we want to accomplish and how would we go about that? So some schools are really heavily focused on language and culture. Some are really maybe a dual language model. Some are focused on immersion. All have like the components of holistic wellness, culture, and Indigenous perspectives. Some are really focused on land-based learning. Others are doing like, internships, different things like that. It just depends. But that's one way we started to share it. The other is we created an Indigenous Knowledge Management Hub, which is open to anybody to find like what our teachers have created and to contribute and or just utilize those types of lessons K through 12. I feel like so much of this is like equally important to students that are in a traditional, maybe comprehensive, like, elementary school, middle school, or high school, to understand like not only the content that we have provided, but also just being able to understand the history of the United States and like the role that Native people have played and continue to. So those are some things that we've done to help share.
Can you say the name of that again that has all the lessons that?
Oh yeah. It's on the Naca Inspired Schools website. It's called the Indigenous Knowledge Management Hub, which is probably not the most. So if anybody out there has like a suggestion on like what to name that, feel free to like send that back our way.
Excellent. So you a couple of times had mentioned that now I've forgotten what it's called, but the land-based teaching. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah. So when we first started Naca, we started with a focus on experiential education as well as like a project around healthy food and Indigenous farming and gardening. And so getting kids like that are involved in actually working on the land to do things that to center their learning. So that was like the first like kind of iteration of that. Now that has grown into a team at Naca that started focusing on things such as like water and water defenders and understanding like what the importance of water within our communities, medicine, and like how do we identify medicine when we're out and about in different areas, whether that's in our home communities or within the city or within the mountains next to us, as well as food and understanding the importance of food and healthy food, how food is grown, how food systems work, and how do they, exist or not exist within our communities as well. And then also thinking about just other ways to blend learning around sciences, whether that's through literature, whether that's through math, whether that's through different content areas that teachers can connect to by taking their students out to the land to be able to do that. So, you know, whether that's an inquiry-based science project or it's a, you know, taking a group of students to harvest pinon for that time and understanding why the significance culturally and also the significance of pinon within the community, what that means, and then distribution and like what does that mean as well. So part of that, we actually are now launching an Indigenous Farmers Hub, which is building out a CSA model to then like grow food and be able to provide that food back to our students and families and community at large, where students are actively engaged in understanding how do you develop a healthy food system and what does it mean to grow, harvest food and create like those opportunities in Indigenous farming. So that's an example. But something I think that also connects our students to land and to other people within our community who may not be a traditional teacher, like in the sense of they come up through a pipeline that might be through a university, but there are those community members who hold all this different knowledge and like expertise that they can learn from.
Great. So if you think about teachers in maybe a traditional public school and where those are who want to do and bring more of this into their classroom, what advice do you have for them about how to think about making their classrooms more culturally responsive?
Yeah, I think knowing your students and families and starting there and just, I mean, and really getting to build a relationship. When I think about being culturally like responsive or culturally linguistically responsive in education, this is like something, you know, I've spent about 18, 20 months at the state thinking about like what are the lessons learned that we can share. One of it is like really understanding like what's the historical context of the community in which you serve. As a teacher, whether you have to do that in isolations or you can do that as an entire school. Two, engaging your community and like what it is they want to see and for their children and getting an understanding of that. So it helps guide the processes and protocols and like outcomes that you're aiming for. I also believe that like we have to have like open conversations and courageous conversations, and we never ever want to set up a student to come into a classroom where they feel like they don't belong. So the sense of belonging within a classroom setting and or a school setting is something that is really really important in opening up your curriculum so that students can explore that in a way that's healthy for them and safe, and also that brings in the different dimensions of all the students that you serve. So one of our parents reflected back to us in our first year, like when you said you were going to serve like 62 different tribes and 13 different ethnicities and be able to do that through your curriculum, I thought it was like I wanted to see that, and I also thought it was incredibly ambitious, and I had no idea how you were going to do that with that many different tribes and perspectives. And so talked about like how our teachers are able to facilitate like open-ended kind of universal questions, enduring understandings, and essential questions that lended themselves to students being able to do that. And when he then in a focus group like came back and told us like my son, you know, comes home and he tells me not only did he share about where he's from and what he knows about our family and our culture and our background and like what he was reading, he also heard from like the other, you know, 15 students in his cohort about what it was that their families experienced. And so then it becomes like just a way to be able to share that without any kind of hesitation. And I think that, you know, students now like really understand their own identities in ways that I don't believe many of us ever had that opportunity in school to be able to do that. So creating real community and being open-ended in like how you're thinking about teaching and also letting students lead, I think is like a good place to start.
Yeah, I've heard that community message from you coming through loud and clear, that it really has to be, everything is based on understanding that the community that you're serving in and where those are. How do you, if you have new teachers coming into the school, how do you prepare them? What kinds of training do they go through?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, you know, as we were growing the school every year, we'd have like a new set of teachers coming in to try to do that. So a lot of it's just modeling. So like when we started the first day of school, like was very different. we started with a song from one of our Navajo instructors, as well as a song from one of our Lakota instructors. And we were outside in a circle with families and students at the same time, really just acknowledging like, this is very different, but this is like, shouldn't be different, right? It should be the norm, and it is now the norm, right? So just like being able to have, and I would always invite our new teachers to those type of experiences before they come on board, so that they're seeing how maybe we close the end of one year out and those significant traditions that we have, whether it was like, you know, our ceremonies at the end around student recognition and graduation and what those look like, whether it was like a community kind of event of some sort too, whether it's an annual powwow or a feast day that we have in the fall. But other than that, is like building in the time, first of all, is like giving teachers like 3 hours a week to be able to have time with their teams, having a mentor within the school that understands the school culture, core values, and what does that mean when we talk about Indigenous perspectives in education, if you're Native or not Native and you're a teacher at the school, as well as we created a couple different things. One is called Growing Educators for Native American Communities, where we co-created with a community college a certification program that uses the Naca framework, a curricular framework, to redesign all of the courses that those teachers would take. And then we took that, and that's our professional development model now. So it's grounded on the kind of notion of ke, which is a word from the Navajo Nation, which talks about relationships, and then goes into like the cycle that is a Navajo learning cycle, which is aligned with the 4 directions, which basically is about reflection, planning, implementation, and then reflection again, which is something that has been in place within our communities for a very long time. So doing the work by using like the different aspects of what we know to be true. The second was the Indigenous Educators Corps, which is an Love AmeriCorps, which gives 20-some young folks or elders to the opportunity to be within schools and to serve alongside educators in these different schools that we support, and then hopefully becoming teachers themselves. But I would say by being connected, having the time to do that, and realizing that there's not a book or a textbook you can pick up that's going to be able to say like, this is how you like indigenize education. Eventually, maybe somebody will write that. One of us should probably do that at some point. But like, but working collaboratively, yeah, and being able to show what that's like, and then always having many resources within the individuals who are around our students and families that want to see this happen. So that's always been helpful too.
Great. Well, I could talk to you all day, but we are already at the end of our time. Thank you so much for sharing your work. It is so interesting and inspiring to hear. So thank you for all you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thanks for this opportunity. Huge fans of all the work that you all do in the world too, and so appreciate this, and I hope you all have a good rest of your month and day.
Thank you. And for all those listening, we do have another show on Thursday with Pedro de Bruquier. He's the author of Urban Myths About Learning and Education, and more urban myths about learning and education. And he will be announcing for the first time his new book. So 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern on Thursday to hear more. Thanks all for joining us.